Ethan Brooks had won 32 police brutality cases without breaking a sweat. The youngest partner at Patterson and Wells knew how the game worked. Evidence disappeared, witnesses changed their stories, grieving families settled quietly. The system protected its own. Then they gave him the Wallace case. They saw what they wanted to see, a grieving black mother and sister demanding justice, represented by a 72-year-old retired attorney who should be home tending her roses. What they couldn't see was Eleanor Washington's quiet smile, the same smile that had faced down the most brutal enforcers of Jim Crow, the same unshakable calm that had brought down corrupt judges and dirty cops for 4 decades without ever raising her voice. Now, as Ethan Brooks struts into that courtroom, ready to destroy another grieving family's case, he's about to learn what hardened criminals already know. When Eleanor Washington comes out of retirement, it's not to fight a case. It's to dismantle an empire. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. And if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow's special episode is one you definitely don't want to miss. Ethan Brooks adjusted, his Italian silk tie in the courthouse bathroom mirror, practicing his signature smirk. At 32, he was the youngest partner at Patterson and Wells, and this case would cement his reputation as the firm's rising star. The morning light streaming through the window caught his perfectly styled blonde hair as he rehearsed his opening statement one final time. His reflection showed exactly what he wanted the world to see: success, power, and unshakable confidence. The bathroom door swung open as Thomas Reed, another partner at the firm, walked in. "Big day, Brooks. The department's watching this one closely. They picked the right man for the job," Ethan replied, running his hand through his hair one last time. "These activist types think they can shake down the police department every time some thug gets what's coming to them. Not on my watch." Thomas frowned slightly. "Just remember, the Wallace family has a lot of community support. We need to handle this delicately." Ethan laughed, the sound echoing off the marble walls. "Delicately? Please. I'll destroy their case before lunch. Watch and learn, old man." Down the hall, his colleagues from the firm huddled around the water cooler, hanging on his every word as he described his strategy. The younger associates looked at him with undisguised admiration, while the more experienced lawyers exchanged knowing glances. "It's the same old story," Ethan proclaimed, gesturing dramatically. "Family loses a criminal relative and tries to cash in. They'll probably parade some grieving mother and sister in front of the jury, trying to play on emotions instead of facts." Sarah Matthews, a junior associate with 3 years of experience, shifted uncomfortably. "But what about the footage from that night? The witnesses said, is irrelevant." Ethan cut her off with a wave of his manicured hand. "These activist types always try to paint their clients as saints. Trust me, I've seen it 100 times. He didn't mention that this was actually his first high-profile police defense case. Details like that didn't matter when you had his natural talent. But shouldn't we at least consider—" Sarah began again. "Listen, sweetheart," Ethan interrupted, his tone dripping with condescension. "I know you're new to this, but leave the strategy to those of us who actually know what we're doing. Why don't you go organize the exhibits or something useful?" Sarah's face flushed red as she turned and walked away. The remaining associates quickly found reasons to disperse, leaving Ethan alone with his inflated sense of importance. Across town, in a modest living room filled with family photos and the lingering scent of fresh coffee, Margaret Wallace sat with her daughter Lisa, both dressed in their Sunday best. Their hands were clasped tight as they waited for their attorney to arrive. A framed photo of Terrence in his graduation cap and gown watched over them from the mantel, his bright smile forever frozen in time. The room itself told the story of a family's life and loss. Pictures chronicled Terrence's journey, from a grinning toddler to a proud high school graduate. His academic achievements hung alongside Lisa's nursing school acceptance letter. A father's absence was marked by the subtle gap in later family photos, leaving Margaret to raise her children alone. "Mama, are you sure about this?" Lisa asked, her voice barely above a whisper. At 23, she was now the only child Margaret had left. "Going up against the police department, it's going to be hard. They're already saying terrible things about Terrence on the news. Margaret reached up to touch the silver cross hanging around her neck, a gift from Terrence on her last birthday. Her fingers traced the familiar pattern as she spoke. Your brother deserved better than dying alone on that street, baby. We owe him the truth. He always stood up for what was right, even when it was hard. Now it's our turn to stand up for him. Lisa nodded, wiping away tears. I miss him so much, Mama. Every day at the hospital, I keep thinking he's going to show up with those silly dollar store flowers like he used to, telling me to stay strong through nursing school. He was so proud of you. Margaret smiled through her own tears. Remember how he worked those extra shifts at the grocery store to help with your textbooks? That boy would do anything for his family. Their moment of remembrance was interrupted by a gentle knock at the door. Margaret smoothed her dress and stood, drawing strength from her faith and her daughter's presence. When she opened the door, she found herself face to face with Eleanor Washington. At 72, Eleanor moved with the deliberate grace of someone who had spent decades commanding courtrooms, her silver hair swept back in a neat bun. Her clothes were simple but immaculate, a navy blue suit that had seen countless battles for justice. Deep lines around her eyes spoke of both laughter and sorrow, while her posture remained straight and dignified. Mrs. Wallace, Lisa, Eleanor, greeted them warmly, though her eyes held a hint of sadness. She'd spent the night reviewing the case files again, and the weight of what she'd read showed in the slight slump of her shoulders. Before we head to the courthouse, I want you both to understand what we're up against. Margaret gestured for Eleanor to sit. When Reverend Mitchell recommended you, he said you were the best, said you've been fighting these battles longer than most. Eleanor placed her worn leather briefcase on the coffee table, its scratches and scuffs telling stories of countless legal battles. I've seen too many cases like Terrence's, too many mothers left without answers. She paused, choosing her words carefully. I retired last year, but when I heard about what happened to your son, some fights you can't walk away from. Lisa leaned forward, her nursing training evident in her practical questions. The other lawyer, what do you know about him? Reverend Mitchell said he's ruthless. Ethan Brooks, Eleanor said, her tone neutral but her eyes sharp. Young, ambitious, with a perfect record defending the department. He'll try to make this about anything except what happened that night. He'll dig through Terrence's past, question his character, paint him as a threat rather than a victim. Are you ready for that? Margaret's grip on her cross tightened. They already killed my boy. They can't hurt him anymore. Eleanor reached out and took Margaret's hand, her grip firm and reassuring. Then let's go tell Terrence's story. But remember, in that courtroom we need to be stronger than our anger, more dignified than their disrespect. Can you do that? Both women nodded, though their eyes showed their fear. They gathered their belongings, Margaret clutching her well-worn Bible, Lisa holding a small photo of Terrence in her purse. As they walked to Eleanor's car, neighbors watched from behind curtained windows, some nodding in support, others quickly turning away. The courthouse steps were a circus of news vans and reporters when they arrived. Camera flashes exploded around them as Eleanor guided the Wallace family through the media gauntlet. Microphones thrust in their faces, questions shouted from all directions, creating a cacophony of accusation and speculation. Mrs. Wallace, do you blame the entire police department? Ms. Washington, coming out of retirement for this case, what makes it special? Lisa, what do you say to claims your brother resisted arrest? Is this case connected to the wider protests against police brutality? Eleanor moved them through with practiced ease, her presence creating a calm bubble in the chaos. She'd walked these steps hundreds of times before, guiding other families through similar storms. Her hand remained steady on Margaret's back, offering silent support as they climbed toward justice. Inside, the courthouse hallway buzzed with tension. Uniformed officers lined the walls, their faces hard as they watched the Wallace family pass. Some wore black bands across their badges in support of their accused colleagues. The message was clear. They stood united against any accusation of wrongdoing. That's when they first encountered Ethan Brooks in person. He was holding court with a group of reporters, his voice carrying down the marble hallway. The officers involved are decorated veterans who risk their lives daily to keep our streets safe. This lawsuit is nothing but an opportunistic—" He broke off as he spotted Eleanor and her clients. "Well, well," he drawled, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I didn't realize we were up against a retiree, though I suppose this case is perfect for someone looking to relive their glory days. Tell me, counselor, do you need help finding the courtroom? I'd hate for you to get lost and miss the part where I destroy your case." The reporter's head swiveled between them, sensing blood in the water. Eleanor met Ethan's mocking gaze with dignified silence, placing a protective hand on Lisa's shoulder as the young woman tensed beside her. "Mr. Brooks," Eleanor finally spoke, her voice carrying just far enough to reach those nearby. "I look forward to seeing your evidence. Experience has taught me that true justice speaks softly, but carries great weight." Ethan's smirk faltered for just a moment before he recovered. "Save the fortune cookie wisdom, Grandma. This isn't your neighborhood legal aid clinic." Inside the courtroom, Judge Michael Whitman watched the proceedings with sharp eyes that missed nothing. His expression remained neutral as Ethan strode to the podium for his opening statement, but those who knew him well might have noticed the slight tightening around his mouth. The gallery was packed, with journalists scribbling in notebooks and community members wearing Justice for Terrence buttons, sitting opposite rows of stern-faced police officers. The air was thick with anticipation as Ethan prepared to speak. "Your Honor, members of the jury," Ethan began, his voice ringing with rehearsed sincerity. "This case is tragic, not because of any wrongdoing by our brave officers, but because it represents a cynical attempt to exploit a criminal's death for financial gain. The evidence will show that Terrence Wallace was a known troublemaker who made a series of fatal choices that night. The officers involved followed their training and protocol to the letter. They deserve medals, not lawsuits." He paced before the jury, his movements calculated to command attention. "You'll hear a lot about community activism and social justice in this trial. But strip away the politics and propaganda and what do you have? A young man who chose to resist arrest, who fought against officers trying to maintain law and order. The tragedy here isn't just his death. It's the way his family and their counsel are trying to twist it into something it's not." Ethan continued for 20 minutes, painting a picture of heroic police officers and a dangerous suspect, his words designed to play on every prejudice and fear. When he finally sat down, his smile was triumphant. He winked at Sarah Matthews, who sat in the gallery taking notes. Eleanor rose slowly, her movements unhurried. The courtroom fell silent, not with the artificial hush of Ethan's performance, but with genuine anticipation. When she spoke, her voice was quiet, but carried to every corner of the room. Terrence Wallace was 26 years old when he died. He worked 2 jobs to help put his sister through nursing school. He taught Sunday school at his church. He had no criminal record. She let each fact land with gentle precision. The defense counsel speaks of protocol and training, but this case is about truth. Not just the truth of one night, but the truth of a system that too often fails to see the humanity in those it's meant to protect. Eleanor didn't pace or gesture dramatically. She stood still, her presence commanding, attention through dignity rather than theatrics. You will hear evidence of what really happened that night. You will hear from witnesses who saw officers escalate a routine stop into a deadly confrontation. You will see documentation of a department more concerned with protecting its image than serving its community. As Eleanor continued, Judge Whitman's gaze flickered between her and Ethan. Few in the courtroom knew that 30 years ago, Eleanor Washington had mentored a young law student named Michael Whitman, teaching him lessons about justice that went far beyond textbooks. Now he watched her work with carefully concealed pride, even as he maintained his judicial impartiality. This case isn't about attacking the police department or undermining law enforcement, Eleanor concluded. It's about holding accountable those who abuse their power and ensuring that no other mother has to bury a child because someone sworn to protect and serve chose to act as judge, jury, and executioner. The gallery remained silent for several moments after she finished, her words hanging in the air. Margaret Wallace sat straight-backed in her seat, tears streaming down her face but her dignity intact. Lisa clutched her mother's hand, their shared strength visible to all. Later, in a quiet moment before they left the courthouse, Eleanor gathered the Wallace family in a small conference room. The day's emotions showed in the slump of their shoulders and the redness around their eyes, but their resolve remained unbroken. "What comes next won't be easy," Eleanor warned them, her voice gentle but firm. "They'll try to drag Terrence's name through the mud. They'll dig through his past, twist his words, paint him as a monster. They'll question every decision he ever made, every friend he ever had. Are you prepared for that?" Margaret straightened her spine, her grief transformed into determination. "My boy is gone, Ms. Washington. All we have left is his truth. You help us tell it." "They think because we're not rich or powerful, we'll give up," Lisa added, her voice stronger now. "But Terrence never backed down from bullies, and neither will we." Eleanor nodded, her own determination matching theirs. "Then we'll face them together. Remember, they have money and influence, but we have something stronger. We have truth on our side." As they left the courthouse, the setting sun painted the sky in shades of purple and gold. Tomorrow would bring new battles, but for now, they had taken the first step toward justice. The war for truth was just beginning. In his office across town, Ethan loosened his tie and poured himself a generous measure of scotch. His confident smile had faded, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty he quickly drowned in alcohol. Something about Eleanor Washington's quiet strength had rattled him, though he'd never admit it. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number. "Chief, we might need to take additional measures. That old lady lawyer, she's not what we expected." He paused, listening to the response. "No, I don't care what it takes. We need to make sure certain things stay buried. This case could blow everything wide open if we're not careful." The pieces were set, the battle lines drawn. In the days to come, both sides would learn that in the fight for justice, appearances could be deceiving, and true strength often came in unexpected forms. As night fell over the city, Eleanor Washington sat in her modest home office, surrounded by case files and photographs, preparing for the battles ahead. She knew from experience that the hardest fights were often the most important ones, and this fight was just beginning. The morning after opening statements, Eleanor sat in her modest home office reviewing case files as dawn broke over the city. The previous day's confrontation with Ethan Brooks had only strengthened her resolve. A steaming cup of coffee sat untouched beside a stack of police reports as she focused on a photograph that had been bothering her since she first took the case. The image showed Officer James Miller standing over Terrence's body, his body camera clearly visible on his chest. Yet somehow, that crucial footage had vanished without a trace. Eleanor's decades of experience told her this was no simple technical malfunction. Her phone buzzed, displaying an unknown number. She answered cautiously, her instincts honed by years of handling sensitive cases. "Ms. Washington?" The voice was male, nervous. I need to talk to you about the Wallace case, but not over the phone. Can we meet?" Eleanor grabbed a pen. "Who is this?" "Someone who knows what really happened that night." "Please. I'll be at Carter Park in an hour, near the chess tables." The line went dead. After decades in law, Eleanor knew the value of anonymous sources and their risks. She called Lisa Wallace, who worked the early shift at Metro General Hospital. "If I don't call you by 9, contact Judge Whitman directly." The park was quiet. At this hour, morning joggers and dog walkers providing just enough activity to make a meeting inconspicuous. Eleanor spotted him immediately. Former Officer David Taylor, fidgeting on a bench, his police instincts making him scan his surroundings constantly. "I didn't expect a former internal affairs investigator to be so nervous," Eleanor said quietly, sitting beside him. Taylor's head snapped around. "How did you—" "I do my homework, Officer Taylor. You investigated Officer Miller 3 years ago. After a similar incident, the case mysteriously disappeared." He slumped, looking older than his 45 years. "That's why I'm here. What happened to Terrence Wallace? It's part of a pattern. Miller and his crew, they've been operating like this for years. Planting evidence, falsifying reports, making body cam footage vanish. And internal affairs did nothing?" Taylor's laugh was bitter. "We tried. God, we tried. But every time we got close, the cases would get buried. Officers would change their statements. Witnesses would recant. Evidence would go missing. Eleanor studied him carefully. Why come forward now? Because I can't sleep anymore. He pulled out a flash drive. This contains every report I filed on Miller's unit, the real reports before they were altered, including what happened the night Wallace died. This could end your career. My career ended the day I chose to look the other way. He stood abruptly. I'll testify if you need me, but be careful. They'll come after you hard for this. Eleanor watched him hurry away, the flash drive heavy in her pocket. She had no illusions about what this meant. The department would deploy every weapon in its arsenal to discredit both Taylor and his evidence. Back at her office, Eleanor began reviewing the files. Hours passed as she uncovered a web of corruption that went far beyond Terrence's case. Multiple incidents of excessive force, falsified evidence, and coordinated cover-ups painted a damning picture of systemic abuse. Her concentration was broken by a commotion outside. A group of protesters had gathered, their chants for justice echoing. Up to her window, news vans lined the street, reporters doing live stand-ups about the growing controversy. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a text from an unknown number. Drop the Taylor evidence or else. Some stories should stay buried. Eleanor took a deep breath, remembering similar threats from past cases. She speed-dialed Margaret Wallace. Mrs. Wallace, we need to meet. Things are about to get complicated. Across town, Ethan Brooks was having his own crisis. He paced his corner office at Patterson and Wells, Taylor's planned testimony throwing his carefully constructed case into chaos. How did you let this happen? Police Chief Richard Wilson's voice boomed through the speakerphone. Taylor was supposed to be handled. With all due respect, Chief, Ethan's usual confidence wavered. You told me he'd been bought off. Now he's giving evidence to Washington. Then discredit him. That's what we pay you for. Taylor had a drinking problem years ago. Use it. Make him look unstable. And the evidence he provided? Evidence can be challenged. Documents can be questioned. Focus on destroying Taylor's credibility. Make him toxic. Ethan loosened his tie, sweat beading on his forehead. What about Washington? She's not backing down. Everyone has secrets. Brooks, find hers. After hanging up, Ethan summoned his team. Sarah Matthews watched with growing discomfort as he outlined their strategy. I want everything on David Taylor. Parking tickets, divorce records, medical history, anything we can use. And I want every case Eleanor Washington has ever lost. Every mistake, every oversight, every questionable decision. That's not exactly legal, Sarah protested. Ethan slammed his hand on the desk. Neither is letting cops go to jail for doing their jobs. Now get to work or find another firm. The next morning, Eleanor arrived at the courthouse to find David Taylor waiting. His face was bruised, his suit wrinkled. They came to my house last night, he said quietly. 2 guys in masks. Said they were just delivering a message. But next time, Eleanor guided him to a private conference room. We can get you protection. No. I won't hide. Miller and his crew need to answer for what they've done. In the courtroom, Ethan was ready. As Taylor took the stand, he approached with predatory confidence. Officer Taylor, isn't it true that you were treated for alcoholism in 2019? Objection! Eleanor stood. Relevance? Goes to the witness's reliability, Your Honor. Judge Whitman frowned. I'll allow it, but tread carefully, Mr. Brooks. Isn't it true, Ethan continued, that you were passed over for promotion 3 times? That your ex-wife cited your paranoid conspiracy theories in your divorce proceedings? Taylor remained calm. Yes, I sought help for drinking. Yes, I was passed over after I started investigating Officer Miller, and my ex-wife worked for the department's PR team, but none of that changes the evidence. Evidence you conveniently discovered years after the fact. Documents that can't be authenticated. Documents that were deliberately buried, Taylor countered. Just like the body cam footage from the night Terrence Wallace died. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Eleanor noticed Judge Whitman lean forward slightly. Your Honor, Eleanor rose. We'd like to present Exhibit C, an internal memo directing Officer Miller to resolve technical issues with his body camera before uploading footage from the night in question. Ethan scrambled. Objection. This document wasn't in discovery. Because it was illegally withheld, Eleanor replied calmly. Along with dozens of other documents Mr. Taylor preserved. Judge Whitman's gaze was stern. Mr. Brooks, was this memo deliberately withheld? Your Honor, the department has strict protocols for handling sensitive internal communications. That's not an answer, Counselor. Before Ethan could respond, a commotion erupted outside the courtroom. The doors burst open as protesters pushed past security, their chants filling the room. Signs demanding justice for Terrence and end police corruption waved above the crowd. Order. Judge Whitman's gavel cracked like thunder. Clear the courtroom. As security restored order, Eleanor noticed Lisa Wallace among the protesters, her face a mask of pain and determination. The young woman caught her eye, silently conveying the community's growing frustration. Once the courtroom was cleared, Judge Whitman addressed both attorneys. This case is becoming a powder keg. I expect both of you to maintain proper decorum and follow all discovery rules. Is that clear? Later that evening, Eleanor received another visitor. Sarah Matthews, clutching a thick folder. I can't be part of this anymore, Sarah said, placing the folder on Eleanor's desk. Ethan's ordered us to dig up dirt on you, Judge Whitman. Anyone who supports the Wallace family. He's even talking about fabricating evidence to discredit Taylor. Eleanor opened the folder, finding detailed surveillance reports on herself and her clients. Why are you showing me this? Because my brother was killed by police 5 years ago. Different city, same story. No one stood up for him then. I became a lawyer to fight this kind of injustice, not help cover it up. You understand what this could cost you? Sarah straightened. Some things matter more than a career. That night, Eleanor worked late again, the pieces of corruption forming a clearer pattern. Her phone buzzed with another threatening text, but she barely noticed. The truth was finally emerging, and no amount of intimidation would stop it. In his apartment, Ethan paced frantically, phone to his ear. Chief, we have a problem. Matthews jumped ship, and she took documents with her. Handle it, Brooks, whatever it takes. But sir, you wanted to play in the big leagues? This is how it works. Make this go away or you'll go away with it. The line went dead, leaving Ethan alone with his crumbling case and growing fear. He poured another drink, his hands shaking slightly as he reached for his phone again. Meanwhile, Eleanor met with Margaret and Lisa Wallace in their home, updating them on Taylor's testimony and the growing evidence of departmental corruption. They're going to say horrible things, Eleanor warned. About David Taylor, about Terrence, about all of us. Are you prepared for that? Margaret clasped her hands in prayer. Lord gave me strength to bury my son. He'll give me strength to face their lies. Lisa's voice was harder. Let them talk. Every lie they tell just proves how scared they are of the truth. Eleanor smiled sadly, remembering countless other families who'd faced similar battles. The protest today, it shows how many people support you, but it also makes you targets. We need to be careful. Terrence used to say, Lisa's voice caught, that change doesn't come from being careful. It comes from being brave. The next morning, news broadcasts led with footage of the courtroom protest. Political pundits debated police accountability while community leaders called for calm. Outside the courthouse, two groups of protesters faced off, one supporting the police, the other demanding justice for Terrence. Eleanor arrived early, finding David Taylor waiting again. His bruises had darkened, but his resolve had strengthened. They offered me money last night, he said. A lot of money. When I refused, they threatened my kids. Eleanor's expression hardened. We can request witness protection. No, my kids are safe. I sent them to my sisters out of state. I'm seeing this through. Inside, Ethan was reviewing his strategy with the remaining members of his team, his usual arrogance replaced by desperate intensity. Taylor is the key. Destroy him, and this all goes away. I don't care what you have to do. Find something we can use. But as he watched his team disperse, Ethan caught his reflection in the window. The polished young lawyer who'd started this case was gone, replaced by someone he barely recognized. The day's testimony focused on the missing body camera footage. Eleanor methodically built her case, presenting document after document showing a pattern of technical difficulties whenever Miller's unit faced accusations of misconduct. During a break, Judge Whitman called both attorneys to his chambers. His expression was grave as he studied them. "This case is becoming about more than one tragic night," he said carefully. "The integrity of the entire system is being questioned. I expect both of you to remember your ethical obligations as officers of the court." Ethan squirmed under the judge's steady gaze, while Eleanor remained composed. Both understood the warning beneath the words. That afternoon, as Sarah Matthews prepared to testify about Ethan's illegal tactics, a bomb threat forced an evacuation of the courthouse. In the chaos, someone slipped another note into Eleanor's briefcase. "Last warning. Some secrets are worth killing for." But it was too late for warnings. The truth, like water, had found its cracks and was beginning to flow. Eleanor Washington had spent her career fighting for justice, and she recognized the moment when a case transformed from a legal battle into a movement for change. As day turned to evening, Eleanor sat with the Wallace family in her office, watching news coverage of the growing protests. Margaret clutched her Bible, drawing strength from its worn pages. Lisa's nursing scrub still bore the creases from her shift, but her exhaustion was overshadowed by determination. "Tomorrow," Eleanor said softly, "we present evidence that goes beyond Terrence's case. Evidence that shows years of systematic abuse and cover-ups. The department will fight back hard. They'll use everything they have." "We're ready," Margaret replied, her faith unshaken. "Truth is like light. The darker it gets, the brighter it shines." Across the city, Ethan Brooks sat alone in his office, surrounded by the wreckage of his perfect record and sterling reputation. On his desk, photos from the internal affairs investigation showed Officer Miller standing over other victims, other families destroyed by unchecked power. His phone buzzed with messages from the police chief, each more threatening than the last. The war for truth was escalating, and tomorrow would bring battles that would change lives forever. But tonight, in the quiet darkness, the city held its breath, waiting to see if justice would finally prevail over power, if truth would overcome corruption, if one family's fight for answers would expose a system built on lies. Eleanor Washington closed her eyes, remembering all the cases that had led to this moment. Tomorrow would test everything she believed about justice and truth. But for now, she had work to do. The evidence was clear, the witnesses were ready, and the time for secrets was ending. The stage was set for a confrontation that would expose not just what happened to Terrence Wallace, but the deep-rooted corruption that had allowed such tragedies to repeat unchecked for years. The question was no longer whether the truth would come out, but who would be left standing when it did. The morning after David Taylor's explosive testimony and the courthouse bomb threat, Eleanor arrived early to review her strategy. The previous day's events had shifted the case's momentum, but she knew from experience that such moments were often followed by fierce counterattacks. The quiet halls of justice would soon become a battlefield. Sarah Matthews sat across from Eleanor's desk, dark circles under her eyes suggesting a sleepless night. "They're going to try to destroy me today," she said quietly. "Ethan's already spread word that I'm unstable, attention-seeking, bitter about being passed over for promotion." Eleanor poured them both coffee from her thermos. "Are you ready for what comes next?" "I've spent 3 years watching them twist the truth. I'm done being part of it." Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she accepted the coffee. "But Ethan, he knows things about my past, things that could hurt my credibility." "Then we'll face them head on," Eleanor replied, her voice steady. "The truth doesn't fear examination, Sarah. Remember that." Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion in the hallway. Officers Miller and Thompson, the two primary defendants in the Wallace case, were arriving for their testimony. Their swagger suggested confidence, but Eleanor noticed the tension in their movements, the way their eyes darted around the corridor. Inside the courtroom, Ethan Brooks was already in place, his usual immaculate appearance slightly frayed at the edges. His phone buzzed constantly with messages from the police chief, each one more demanding than the last. Judge Whitman called the court to order, his gaze lingering on the extra security posted at each door. The gallery was packed, with community, activists on one side and police supporters on the other. The tension was palpable. "Your Honor," Eleanor rose. "The prosecution calls Officer James Miller to the stand." Miller approached with practiced confidence, his dress uniform pressed and medals gleaming. He'd testified in dozens of cases before, always emerging unscathed. But as he passed the Wallace family, his step faltered slightly. Eleanor began her cross-examination with deceptive gentleness. "Officer Miller, please tell us about your body camera on the night of Terrence Wallace's death." "As I stated in my report, the camera malfunctioned. A unfortunate coincidence." "Tell me, how many times has your camera malfunctioned during incidents? Involving civilian casualties?" Miller shifted uncomfortably. "I don't recall the exact number." Eleanor approached with a stack of documents. "Let me refresh your memory. In the past 5 years, your body camera has mysteriously failed during 7 incidents involving excessive force complaints. Each time, the footage was declared irretrievable by technical services." "Objection," Ethan shot to his feet. "Counsel is trying to establish a pattern based on unrelated incidents." "Your Honor," Eleanor countered, "these incidents demonstrate a systematic attempt to conceal evidence." Judge Whitman leaned forward. "I'll allow it. The witness will answer." Miller's facade cracked slightly. "Technical problems happen. It's not unusual." "Not unusual?" Eleanor's voice remained calm, but carried to every corner of the room. "Let's discuss Officer Sandra Chen. When she reported your conduct during the Martinez incident, she was transferred to desk duty. When Officer Taylor investigated you, his career was destroyed. When Terrence Wallace's friend tried to film your actions that night, his phone was confiscated and never returned." "Objection. Counsel is testifying." "Withdrawn." Eleanor changed, direction smoothly. "Officer Miller, where were you on the night of April 15th, 3 days before Terrence Wallace's death?" The question caught Miller off guard. I was on patrol." "Were you? Or were you at the Blue Line bar, meeting with Officers Thompson and Rogers planning how to handle community troublemakers in your patrol area?" Miller's face paled. Sarah Matthews leaned forward, recognizing the date. She'd been at that bar, gathering evidence that would later drive her to switch sides. "I want to invoke my Fifth Amendment rights," Miller said suddenly. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Eleanor merely nodded, as if she'd expected this. "No further questions, Your Honor." During the lunch recess, Ethan cornered Sarah outside the courthouse cafe. "You told her about the bar meeting, didn't you? You little traitor." "Back off, Ethan," Sarah warned, noticing a news photographer nearby. "You think you're so righteous? Wait until they hear about your brother, about how he really died." Sarah's face hardened. "Go ahead. I'm not afraid of the truth anymore." The afternoon session began with Officer Thompson's testimony. Eleanor's approach shifted, becoming more aggressive as she sensed the defense's growing desperation. "Officer Thompson, explain why your arrest record shows a disturbing pattern of targeting young black men in routine stops." "Objection. Inflammatory." Overruled. "The witness will answer." Thompson's arrogance cracked under Eleanor's relentless questioning. His answers became defensive, contradictory. When she presented statistics showing racial disparities in his use of force, he lost his composure. "You don't know what it's like out there. We're trying to keep order in a jungle, and you people—" "Thank you, Officer Thompson." Eleanor cut him off smoothly. No further questions. By late afternoon, the prosecution's case had gained undeniable momentum. Eleanor methodically exposed years of misconduct, building a picture of systemic abuse that went far beyond Terrence's death. During a break, Margaret Wallace approached Eleanor in the hallway. "Ms. Washington, there's something you should know. Someone broke into our house last night." Eleanor's expression darkened. "Was anything taken?" "No, but they left this on Terrence's photo." Margaret handed over a note that read, "Drop the case, or the next funeral will be yours." "We're not stopping," Margaret said firmly. "Terrence wouldn't want us to." Eleanor squeezed her hand. "We'll get you protection. This means we're getting close to the truth." Back in court, Ethan attempted to rebuild his case through character witnesses praising the officer's service records. But each testimony crumbled under Eleanor's cross-examination as she exposed contradictions and half-truths. "Detective Phillips," Eleanor addressed one witness, "you testified that Officer Miller has an exemplary record of community service. Were you aware of the 17 civilian complaints filed against him in the past 3 years? Those complaints were unfounded. Unfounded or buried. Like the dashcam footage from the Robinson incident, the witness statements that mysteriously vanished from the Garcia case." As Eleanor pressed harder, Ethan became increasingly agitated. During another recess, he made a desperate call to the police chief. "She knows everything. Someone's feeding her information about cases we buried years ago." "Then use the contingency plan," the chief growled. "You know what's at stake here." That evening, as Eleanor prepared to leave the courthouse, she found Sarah waiting by her car. "They're planning something," Sarah warned. "Ethan made calls to some people, the kind you don't want to know about. Be careful going home." Eleanor smiled sadly. "I've faced worse than Ethan Brooks and his friends, but thank you, Sarah. You've shown real courage." At home, Eleanor reviewed her notes for the next day's witnesses. Her phone lit up with another anonymous threat, but she barely glanced at it. Instead, she opened an old photo album, touching, a picture of herself and her late husband at a civil rights march decades ago. "Still fighting the same battles, James," she whispered. "But we're getting closer." A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Through the peephole, she saw 2 men in dark clothes. Their hands were concealed in their jackets. Eleanor calmly called Judge Whitman. "Michael, remember that favor you owe me? I need it now." Within minutes, unmarked police cars surrounded her house. The would-be intruders fled, but their message was clear. The stakes were escalating. The next morning, Eleanor arrived in court to find the gallery even more crowded. Word of the previous day's revelations had spread, drawing national media attention. Civil rights leaders sat alongside community members, while rows of uniformed officers filled the opposition side. As she prepared to call her next witness, Ethan approached the bench with a desperate motion. "Your Honor, we've discovered evidence that Mrs. Washington has a conflict of interest in this case. Her husband's death in 1992 involved officers from the same precinct." Eleanor didn't flinch. "My husband was killed by racist officers who were later convicted of civil rights violations. If Mr. Brooks thinks this makes me biased against police corruption, he's correct." Judge Whitman's voice was sharp. "Motion denied, Mr. Brooks, and I caution you about making personal attacks on counsel." Eleanor's next witness was a forensics expert who analyzed the pattern of injuries on Terrence's body. Their testimony systematically dismantled the officer's claim of self-defense, showing that Terrence had been struck repeatedly while already subdued. During cross-examination, Ethan's questions became increasingly hostile, revealing his desperation. "Isn't it true that you were fired from your previous position?" "I resigned," the expert corrected, "after refusing to alter evidence in a police shooting case." The morning's testimony was interrupted by news that David Taylor had been attacked outside his home. Though injured, he insisted on taking the stand. "They think they can scare us into silence," he told Eleanor, holding an ice pack to his swollen face. "But they don't understand. We're not afraid anymore. The truth is stronger than their threats." As Taylor testified about years of covered-up misconduct, Eleanor noticed Ethan receiving texts that made him increasingly agitated. During a break, she overheard him arguing with someone on the phone. "I don't care what it costs. Find something we can use against her. Everyone has secrets. Dig deeper." But Eleanor's own investigation was moving faster. That afternoon, she presented evidence linking the department's top brass to a pattern of civil rights violations spanning decades. The documents showed that complaints against officers like Miller were routinely buried, while officers who spoke up faced retaliation. "Your Honor," Eleanor addressed the court, "this case isn't just about Terrence Wallace anymore. It's about a system that protects abusers and punishes those who try to stop them. The same officers who killed my husband 30 years ago trained the men who killed Terrence Wallace. The same officials who covered up that crime are still in power, still burying evidence, still destroying lives. In the gallery, Margaret Wallace wept quietly as Lisa held her hand. Around them, community members nodded in recognition of shared pain and shared purpose. Ethan's rebuttal was passionate but unfocused. His usual swagger had been replaced by barely controlled panic as he felt the case slipping away. The defense maintains that these officers acted appropriately given the circumstances. Any procedural irregularities were minor and did not affect the outcome. Officer Miller and his colleagues are dedicated public servants being unfairly targeted by activists with a political agenda. But his words rang hollow against the weight of evidence Eleanor had presented. Even some of the officers in the gallery looked uncomfortable, perhaps recognizing that the wall of silence was finally cracking. Late that afternoon, Sarah Matthews took the stand. Despite Ethan's attempts to discredit her, she remained composed. As she detailed years of systematic corruption she'd witnessed at the firm, they taught us how to bury evidence, how to intimidate witnesses, how to protect officers no matter what they'd done, she testified. When I objected, they reminded me that my career depended on being a team player. And why should we believe you now? Ethan sneered during cross-examination. Isn't this just revenge for being passed over for promotion? Sarah met his gaze steadily. No, Mr. Brooks. This is about choosing truth over power, something you wouldn't understand. As the day drew to a close, Eleanor received word that more witnesses were coming forward. Other officers, department employees, even prosecutors who had buried similar cases over the years. The wall of silence was crumbling. In his chambers, Judge Whitman reviewed the day's transcripts with growing concern. The case had expanded far beyond its original scope, threatening to expose corruption at every level of law enforcement. He knew there would be powerful forces moving to stop it. Eleanor worked late into the night, knowing that tomorrow would bring even fiercer battles. The threats against her had escalated, but they only proved she was on the right track. In her decades of fighting for justice, she'd learned that the stronger the resistance, the closer you were to the truth. At home, she added another photo to her case file, Terrence Wallace's graduation picture next to a photo of her husband. Different decades, different circumstances, but the same story of power abused and justice denied. But this time, she had the evidence to expose it all. Across town, Ethan paced his office, surrounded by scattered files and empty coffee cups. His phone buzzed with another message from the police chief. Handle it, or everything burns. The morning light cast long shadows through the courthouse windows as Eleanor Washington reviewed a manila envelope that had been slipped under her office door overnight. Inside was a USB drive and a handwritten note. From the chief's personal files. Use it wisely. The anonymous leak suggested that even within the department's highest ranks, consciences were beginning to stir. But before Eleanor could examine the drive's contents, her phone buzzed with urgent news. Marcus Rodriguez, a key witness who had filmed part of Terrence's fatal encounter with police, had been involved in a suspicious car accident on his way to court. She immediately dialed Detective James Chen, one of the few honest officers she still trusted. How bad is it, James? He's alive, but in intensive care. Eleanor. His brake lines were cut. Eleanor's grip tightened on the phone. Was he able to say anything? Just one word before they took him into surgery. Footage. Whatever. They really didn't want him showing it. The implications were clear. Someone had accessed the witness list and taken desperate measures to silence testimony. Eleanor immediately called Margaret Wallace to warn her family about increased security measures. In his lavish downtown office, Ethan Brooks was already aware of Rodriguez's accident. The police chief's latest message glowed on his phone screen. Problem handled. Make sure it stays buried. Ethan stared at his reflection in the window, barely recognizing the man he'd become. His perfectly tailored suit couldn't hide the dark circles under his eyes or the slight tremor in his hands as he reached for his morning scotch. Sarah Matthews knocked on his door, her expression grim. They're saying Rodriguez's accident wasn't random. Careful, Sarah, Ethan warned. Some questions are better left unasked. Like the questions about what really happened to the original dashcam footage. She held his gaze. I know you have. A copy, Ethan. I saw you hide it in your personal safe the day after Terrence died. Before Ethan could respond, his phone buzzed with news that would change everything. Eleanor Washington had just submitted a motion to introduce newly discovered evidence. Internal communications suggesting the police chief himself had ordered the destruction of evidence in multiple cases involving Officer Miller's unit. The morning's court session began with Eleanor addressing Judge Whitman about the attack on Rodriguez. The gallery was packed, the tension palpable as she detailed the suspicious circumstances. Your Honor, this pattern of witness intimidation cannot be ignored. Mr. Rodriguez is the third witness to face retaliation for agreeing to testify. Ethan rose to object. Your Honor, while the accident is unfortunate, my colleague is making unfounded accusations. Unfounded? Eleanor's voice carried quiet authority. Like the unfounded complaints against Officer Miller. Like the unfounded concerns raised by Officer Taylor before he was attacked. Judge Whitman's expression was grave. Ms. Washington, do you have evidence linking these incidents to the defendants? Yes, Your Honor. Eleanor held up the USB drive. This drive contains emails and text messages demonstrating a coordinated effort to silence witnesses and suppress evidence. I move to enter these documents into evidence immediately. Ethan's objection was immediate and desperate. Your Honor, we haven't had time to authenticate these alleged documents. Then I suggest you do so during the lunch recess, Judge Whitman replied firmly. These allegations are too serious to dismiss without examination. As Eleanor began presenting the new evidence, the story it told was damning. Years of systematic corruption unfolded through emails, text messages, and internal memos. The documents revealed a department culture that prioritized protecting its own over serving justice. Margaret and Lisa Wallace sat in the gallery, their faces showing a mix of vindication and horror as the true scope of the corruption emerged. Around them, community members who had lost loved ones to police violence nodded in grim recognition of patterns they'd long suspected, but couldn't prove. During the lunch recess, Eleanor met privately with the Wallace family in a secure conference room. They're going to try to discredit this evidence, she warned, and they might come after you even harder now. Margaret's faith remained unshaken. The Lord didn't bring us this far to abandon us now. Lisa squeezed her mother's hand. Terrence always said the truth was like a sunrise. You can try to ignore it, but it's going to shine anyway. Back in court, Ethan tried to challenge the authenticity of the leaked documents, but his usual confidence had evaporated. Each attempt to discredit the evidence only led Eleanor to reveal more damaging details. Mr. Brooks, she addressed him directly during cross-examination of a police IT specialist, are you aware that these emails include communications between your office and the police chief discussing ways to, and I quote, make the Wallace problem go away permanently? Ethan's face paled. The gallery erupted in murmurs as Eleanor pressed on. In fact, your own emails suggest you were aware of Officer Miller's history of excessive force complaints before you agreed to represent him. Isn't that true? I wish to invoke my Fifth Amendment rights, Ethan stammered, shocking the courtroom into silence. Judge Whitman's gavel cracked like thunder. Mr. Brooks, you cannot selectively invoke the Fifth Amendment while continuing to represent your clients. Either withdraw from the case or answer the question. The afternoon session brought a surprise witness, Karen Miller, Officer James Miller's ex-wife. Her hands shook as she took the stand, but her voice was steady as she described years of witnessing her former husband's racist comments and brutal attitudes toward minorities in his patrol area. He used to brag about it, she testified, about teaching young black men their place, about making evidence disappear when things got too rough. When I threatened to report him, he said no one would believe me over a decorated officer. Ethan's cross-examination was aggressive but ineffective. Isn't this simply revenge against your ex-husband? Aren't you bitter about the divorce? I'm here because I have to live with staying silent for too long, Karen replied, because Terrence Wallace's mother deserves to know why her son died. As Karen stepped down, Eleanor noticed several police officers in the gallery shifting uncomfortably. The wall of silence was cracking, and everyone could feel it. The day's final witness was Dr. Angela Thompson, a police psychologist who had evaluated Officer Miller's unit multiple times. Her testimony revealed a pattern of escalating aggression and racial bias that had been flagged in numerous reports that were subsequently buried by department leadership. I recommended Officer Miller's removal from street duty 3 times, Dr. Thompson stated. Each time my reports were ignored or altered. When I persisted, I was told my contract wouldn't be renewed if I didn't revise my findings. Outside the courthouse, the crowd of protesters had grown larger and more diverse. Civil rights leaders stood alongside suburban mothers, college students, next to retired police officers who could no longer stay silent. Their chants for justice echoed through the courthouse windows. Eleanor used their presence to make a point about community impact. "This case isn't just about one tragic night," she told the jury. "It's about a system that has lost its way, about power unchecked and accountability denied. Every person standing outside represents a community that has lost faith in those sworn to protect them." As the day drew to a close, Eleanor received word that Marcus Rodriguez had emerged from surgery. He was weak but stable, and more importantly, ready to testify via video link about what he'd witnessed the night Terrence died. Ethan's desperation reached new heights. During a brief recess, he cornered Eleanor in the courthouse library. "You have no idea what you're doing," he hissed. "You think this is about justice? There are people involved who will do anything to keep their secrets buried." Eleanor met his gaze calmly. "I've spent my life fighting people who think their power puts them above the law. They don't scare me, Ethan, and neither do you." That evening, as Eleanor prepared for the next day's testimony, she received an unexpected visit from Judge Whitman at her office. "The Chief Justice called me today," he said without preamble. "There's pressure to declare a mistrial, to bury this whole thing." "And what did you tell him?" "That I took an oath to uphold justice, not protect the powerful." He paused. "Like someone taught me long ago." Eleanor smiled, remembering the idealistic law student he'd once been. "They'll come after you too, Michael. Let them try. Some things are worth the cost." Later that night, Eleanor visited Marcus Rodriguez in the hospital. Despite his injuries, his determination was unshaken. "I still have the original video," he whispered. "Kept it hidden all this time, waiting for someone I could trust." The footage shows everything. Miller planting evidence, the other officers helping cover it up. "They killed Terrence in cold blood, Ms. Washington." As Eleanor left the hospital, she noticed 2 unmarked cars following her. Instead of going home, she drove to the Wallace family's church, where Reverend Mitchell had offered sanctuary to witnesses fearing retaliation. Inside, she found Sarah Matthews meeting with other department whistleblowers who had decided to come forward. Their stories formed a pattern of abuse and cover-up stretching back years. "Each person who speaks up gives others courage," Sarah observed. "It's like dominoes falling." Eleanor nodded, thinking of all the cases she'd fought over the decades. Change happens when good people refuse to be silent. Terrence's death could be the catalyst that finally breaks the cycle. Across town, Ethan Brooks sat in his darkened office, watching news coverage of the day's testimony. His phone hadn't stopped buzzing with threatening messages from the police chief and others higher up the chain of command. Finally, he made a decision. Opening his personal safe, he removed a file containing the original dashcam footage from the night Terrence died. His hands trembled as he dialed Eleanor's number. "I need to meet," he said when she answered. "There's something you should see, but not here. They're watching me." Eleanor agreed to a meeting at midnight in the church basement. Before heading there, she called both Judge Whitman and Detective Chen, ensuring backup would be nearby if needed. As she drove through the quiet city streets toward the church, Eleanor reflected on how this case had become about so much more than one young man's death. It was about breaking a cycle of abuse and silence that had destroyed countless lives. It was about giving voice to those who had been silenced for too long. The church loomed ahead, its windows dark except for a single light in the basement. Eleanor parked carefully, noting the unmarked police car parked discreetly across the street, Detective Chen keeping watch as promised. Before stepping out of her car, she said a quiet prayer. Not for safety or success, but for the strength to see this through to the end, whatever the cost. The truth about Terrence Wallace's death was finally coming to light, and with it, the chance to change a broken system. The night air was cool as she walked toward the church, carrying the weight of decades of injustice and the hope of long-delayed change. Tomorrow would bring new battles, but tonight might bring the evidence that would break the case wide open. The midnight meeting at the church had changed everything. Ethan Brooks' handover of the original dashcam footage set in motion a chain of events that would expose the full depth of corruption within the department. As dawn broke over the courthouse, Eleanor Washington prepared to present evidence that would shatter the wall of silence once and for all. Sarah Matthews arrived early, carrying a thick folder of emails she'd secretly archived during her time at Ethan's firm. These prove he knew about the cover-up from the beginning, she explained. Every email between Ethan and the police chief, documenting their conspiracy to bury evidence. Eleanor studied the emails carefully. They were so confident in their power, they didn't even try to hide their tracks. "Pride comes before the fall," Sarah quoted softly. Inside the courtroom, tension crackled as Eleanor rose to address Judge Whitman. "Your Honor, the prosecution has obtained new evidence that directly implicates Mr. Brooks in the conspiracy to obstruct justice." Ethan's face drained of color as Eleanor presented the emails. His carefully constructed facade began to crack as she read them aloud. From Police Chief Wilson to Ethan Brooks, dated the night of Terrence Wallace's death. Handle this like the others. Evidence disappears. Witnesses change their stories. Case goes away. The gallery erupted in murmurs as Eleanor continued. "Mr. Brooks' response, already on it. No one will believe some activist family over decorated officers. I'll make sure of it." Ethan jumped to his feet. "These emails are fabricated. This is a desperate attempt to—" "The emails have been authenticated by digital forensics experts," Eleanor cut in smoothly. "Furthermore, we have testimony from your own IT department confirming their authenticity." Judge Whitman's voice cut through the chaos. "Mr. Brooks, these are serious allegations of professional misconduct. Do you wish to respond?" Instead of answering, Ethan turned to his phone, frantically texting the police chief. But the response he received offered no comfort. "You're on your own, Brooks. Save yourself." The morning's testimony focused on the Wallace family. Margaret Wallace took the stand first, her dignity intact despite months of character assassination attempts. "My son taught Sunday school," she began, her voice steady. "He worked 2 jobs to help his sister through nursing school. The night he died, he was walking home from the grocery store where he worked late shifts. He called me just before—" Her voice caught, but she pressed on. "He said he was bringing home ice cream for Lisa's graduation celebration." Eleanor guided her, testimony gently. "Mrs. Wallace, what happened when you tried to get answers about your son's death?" "They said he was dangerous. Said he attacked those officers. But I raised that boy. He never raised his hand to anyone in anger. When I asked to see the body, camera footage, they said it was lost. When I asked for witnesses, they said no one saw anything." As Margaret testified, Lisa Wallace sat in the gallery, tears streaming down her face. Community members reached out to touch her shoulders, offering silent support. Ethan's cross-examination was desperate and harsh. "Isn't it true that Terrence had a juvenile record?" "Objection," Eleanor's voice cracked like a whip. "Mr. Brooks knows that record was expunged because the charges were proven false." "Sustained," Judge Whitman ruled sharply. Mr. Brooks approached the bench. At sidebar, the judge's voice was cold. "One more stunt like that, counselor, and you'll be facing contempt charges. Are we clear?" After lunch, Eleanor played the dash cam footage Ethan had surrendered. The courtroom fell silent as the video showed what really happened that night. Officer Miller could be clearly seen planting evidence near Terrence's body, while other officers created a perimeter to block public view. "The prosecution calls Ethan Brooks to the stand," Eleanor announced. Ethan looked like a trapped animal as he took the oath. His usual swagger was gone, replaced by barely concealed panic. Mr. Brooks, how long have you been helping the department cover up police misconduct? I deny these allegations completely. I've always conducted myself ethically. Let me refresh your memory. Eleanor held up another document. This is a memo from your firm to the police department, dated 3 years ago. It outlines strategies for, quote, managing problematic evidence and witnesses in officer-involved incidents. Your signature is at the bottom. Ethan's composure finally shattered. You don't understand. Do you know what they do to lawyers who don't play ball? What they do to their families? So you admit to participating in the cover-up. They gave me no choice. The department runs this city. They make or break careers. He stopped abruptly, realizing what he'd admitted. The gallery erupted in chaos. Judge Whitman's gavel cracked repeatedly as he called for order. In the EQ confusion, Eleanor noticed several senior officers quietly leaving the courtroom. During the afternoon recess, news broke that Police Chief Wilson had resigned, citing personal reasons. Within hours, Internal Affairs launched investigations into dozens of officers connected to the Wallace case. But the day's most powerful moment came when Lisa Wallace took the stand. She described her last conversation with Terrence, his dreams for the future, his pride in her becoming a nurse. The last thing he said to me was, "Keep helping people, little sis. That's what matters." Her voice broke. The next time I saw him was in the morgue. Ethan didn't even attempt to cross-examine her. He sat at the defense table, staring blankly ahead as his career and reputation crumbled around him. By day's end, the police officers' union had withdrawn its support from the defendants. Officer Miller and his colleagues sat isolated, abandoned by the system they'd served. Eleanor received word that the state attorney general was launching a broader investigation into department practices. The wall of silence hadn't just cracked, it had shattered completely. In his chambers, Judge Whitman signed orders for emergency injunctions against witness intimidation and evidence tampering. Years of systematic corruption were finally being dragged into the light. That evening, as Eleanor prepared to leave the courthouse, she found Sarah Matthews waiting by her car. "They're saying Ethan tried to flee the country," Sarah said quietly. "Federal agents stopped him at the airport." Eleanor nodded, unsurprised. When people like that finally face consequences, they run. They're not used to being held accountable. The night air was cool as they walked to their cars, both aware that their lives had changed forever. The truth about Terrence Wallace's death had exposed not just individual corruption, but a system built on lies and intimidation. In the Wallace home, Margaret and Lisa sat surrounded by community members who'd supported them throughout the trial. Reverend Mitchell led them in prayer, not just for justice, but for healing. Across the city, honest police officers began coming forward with their own stories of corruption they'd witnessed. The blue wall of silence was crumbling, making way for a new generation of law enforcement committed to true justice. Eleanor drove home under a sky full of stars, thinking of all the families who might finally see justice because one mother refused to be silenced, one sister kept fighting, and one young man's death became a catalyst for change. The truth had finally emerged, not in a sudden explosion, but in the steady revelation of evidence, testimony, and courage. Ethan's true colors had been exposed, along with the corrupt system he served. Now, the real work of reform could begin. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. But tonight, justice had prevailed. Terrence Wallace's death would not be in vain. His story had broken the chains of silence that had bound the city for too long. As Eleanor reviewed her notes for the next day's proceedings, she thought of Margaret Wallace's words. "All we have left is his truth." That truth had proven stronger than corruption, more powerful than intimidation, more lasting than lies. The case wasn't over, but its impact was already rippling through the justice system. Ethan's downfall was just the beginning of a larger transformation, as truth finally triumphed over power. The morning after Ethan's attempted flight and arrest, Eleanor Washington arrived at the courthouse to find Detective James Chen waiting, with troubling news. Despite the previous day's revelations, powerful forces were mobilizing to contain the damage. "They're calling in favors at every level," Chen reported, his voice low. "Federal judges, state officials, even members of Congress. Someone really doesn't want this case to expose any more secrets. Eleanor sipped her coffee, watching early morning light filter through the courthouse windows. They're scared, James. When people with power get scared, they get desperate. It's more than that. Chen glanced around before continuing. The department's internal servers were wiped clean last night. Years of records just gone. They're destroying everything they can't control. Inside her office, Eleanor found another anonymous note. Back off now. Next time we won't miss. Attached was a photograph of her car's cut brake lines, taken in the courthouse parking garage. Before she could process this latest threat, Sarah Matthews burst in, her face pale. Eleanor, our key witness, he's gone. Marcus Rodriguez? He's under protection at the hospital. No, not Rodriguez. Michael Carter, the former officer who was going to testify about the department's secret quota system. He disappeared from his hotel room last night. The security cameras mysteriously malfunctioned. Eleanor's phone buzzed with a text from Judge Whitman. Emergency meeting in chambers, now. In the judge's chambers, the gravity of the situation became clear. Michael Whitman's usual judicial composure was strained as he explained the pressure being applied from above. They're threatening to expose every controversial decision I've ever made, he admitted. Every case where I might have bent the rules for the right outcome. They're even dragging up my time as a civil rights lawyer, trying to paint me as biased. They won't stop with threats, Eleanor warned. Look what happened to Carter. I know. But Eleanor, he hesitated. They found something. That case from '89, the one we both know should have gone differently. They're saying they have proof we suppressed evidence. Eleanor's mind raced back to that case. A young activist found dead in police custody. They'd known the official story was a lie, but proving it would have meant revealing sources who would have been killed. They'd made a terrible choice for the right reasons. Use it against me if you have to, Michael. But don't let them bury this case. Outside the courthouse, the protests had taken an ugly turn. Police in riot gear faced off against angry demonstrators, while provocateurs in the crowd tried to incite violence. Eleanor watched from her window as someone threw a Molotov cocktail, sending officers and protesters scrambling. Margaret Wallace called, her voice shaking. Ms. Washington, someone broke into our house again. They destroyed Terrence's room, spray-painted threats on the walls. Lisa had to go stay with friends. She's terrified. Pack a bag, Eleanor instructed. I'm sending Detective Chen to move you somewhere safe. But the threats weren't just targeting the Wallace family. That afternoon, Eleanor learned that Sarah, Matthew's brother's grave had been desecrated, with warnings left that she would join him if she didn't recant her testimony. In court, Eleanor pressed forward despite the growing danger. She presented evidence of historical patterns of misconduct, showing how officers like Miller operated with impunity for years. Your Honor, she addressed Judge Whitman. We move to introduce evidence linking current department leadership to decades of civil rights violations. The new defense attorney, replacing the disgraced Ethan Brooks, objected immediately. Your Honor, this goes far beyond the scope of the current case. The pattern of abuse is directly relevant, Eleanor countered. Officer Miller's actions, the night Terrence Wallace died, weren't an anomaly. They were standard operating procedure, protected and enabled by department leadership. Before Judge Whitman could rule, a bomb threat forced evacuation of the courthouse. As they filed out, Eleanor noticed several senior officers huddled with the defense attorney, their expressions grim. During the delay, Eleanor met with her remaining witnesses in a nearby church basement. The fear was visible on their faces as they discussed the disappearance of Michael Carter. He knew too much, former Officer Wilson explained. Carter had proof that the quota system targeted minority neighborhoods specifically. Names, dates, direct orders from the top. They'll come after all of us next, another witness worried. Eleanor addressed the group firmly. I know you're scared, but if we stop now, nothing changes. More young men die, more evidence disappears, more families never get justice. Is that what you want? A young officer spoke up. My partner planted evidence on a teenager last week. When I reported it, they transferred me to desk duty, said I needed to learn how things really work. This is how things change, Eleanor encouraged. One voice at a time, one truth at a time. Back at the courthouse, After the bomb threat was cleared, Eleanor received word that the police union was pressuring officers to sign false statements discrediting the witnesses. Those who refused faced unofficial retaliation, bad shifts, dangerous assignments, no backup when called. Judge Whitman called both legal teams to his chambers. "I'm being told to declare a mistrial," he admitted. "They're claiming evidence contamination, witness tampering, prejudicial publicity." "By them," Eleanor protested. "They're the ones threatening witnesses and destroying evidence." "I know, but they've got judges in 3 circuits ready to back their play. If I don't comply, they'll force a change of venue to a friendly court." Eleanor thought quickly. "Give me 24 hours. I have one more witness they don't know about." That evening, Eleanor worked late in her office reviewing evidence as storm clouds gathered outside. Thunder rolled as she examined grainy surveillance footage from the night Terrence died. A knock at her door revealed Lisa Wallace, soaking wet from the rain. "I remembered something," she said urgently. "The night Terrence died, he called me, right before his last call to Mama. He said he saw officers meeting behind the grocery store exchanging something. He was going to record it on his phone." That's why they killed him, Eleanor realized. He witnessed a drug deal, officers selling confiscated evidence. "His phone was never found," Lisa continued. "But Terrence always backed up everything to his cloud account. I finally remembered the password." Eleanor immediately called Detective Chen to arrange secure access to Terrence's cloud storage. But as they worked to download the files, the power went out across 3 city blocks. "They're watching us," Chen said grimly. "Someone tipped them off." Through the darkness came the sound of breaking glass. Chen drew his weapon as footsteps approached Eleanor's office. "Get her out of here," he ordered Lisa. "There's a secure exit through the basement." As Eleanor and Lisa hurried down the dark stairwell, voices echoed above them. Chen's shouts were followed by gunfire, then silence. They emerged into the rain, to find Eleanor's car with slashed tires. Lisa led the way to her own vehicle, parked 2 blocks away. "Where are we going?" she asked as they drove through the stormy night. "To see your mother," Eleanor decided. "It's time to tell her everything." At a safe house outside the city, Margaret Wallace listened as Eleanor and Lisa explained what Terrence had discovered. Her grief transformed into steel-hard resolve. "My boy died trying to expose their crimes," she said. "We owe it to him to finish what he started." Eleanor's phone lit up with news. Detective Chen was alive but wounded. The attackers had taken Eleanor's laptop and files, but hadn't found the backup drives hidden in her office walls. As the night wore on, more allies emerged. Honest officers formed a protective detail around the safe house. Community leaders organized peaceful vigils at the courthouse. Journalists began publishing details of the department's intimidation tactics. But the opposition wasn't finished. Eleanor received word that federal prosecutors were being pressured to investigate her for alleged witness tampering. Judge Whitman faced an ethics inquiry. Sarah Matthews was followed by unmarked cars. The next morning, Eleanor walked into court. Despite the threats carrying the evidence downloaded from Terrence's cloud account, the gallery was packed with supporters and opponents alike. "Your Honor," she began, "we have new evidence proving that Terrence Wallace was murdered not just for being in the wrong place at the wrong time, but because he witnessed criminal activity by Officer Miller and others." The defense team erupted in objections, but fell silent as Eleanor played a video from Terrence's phone. The grainy footage clearly showed officers exchanging packages behind the grocery store. "This is what Terrence Wallace saw the night he died," Eleanor told the hushed courtroom. "This is why a dedicated young man had to die, because he witnessed the corruption at the heart of this department." During the lunch recess, Eleanor received multiple calls from high-ranking officials offering deals. Drop the conspiracy charges, limit the case to Officer Miller alone, and the pressure would disappear. "They're running scared," Sarah observed as they reviewed the offers. "Good," Eleanor replied. "Scared people make mistakes." That afternoon, one of those mistakes proved crucial. Under cross-examination, a senior officer cracked, admitting that department leadership had ordered the destruction of evidence in multiple cases. "We were told it was for the greater good," he testified. protect the department's reputation, maintain public trust. But really, we were just protecting criminals with badges. As word of his testimony spread, more officers came forward. The thin blue line was crumbling as those who'd been coerced into silence found their voices. But the old guard wasn't surrendering without a fight. That evening, as Eleanor left the courthouse, she noticed a red laser dot appear on her chest. "Get down!" Detective Chen, still bandaged from the previous night, tackled her as a shot rang out. The bullet shattered the courthouse window behind where she'd been standing. In the chaos that followed, Eleanor thought of all the others who'd died seeking justice. Her husband, Terrence Wallace, countless unnamed victims of a corrupt system. "They're getting desperate," Chen said as they huddled behind a concrete barrier. "This is how it ends. Either they go down, or they make sure everyone goes down with them." From their safe house, the Wallace family watched news coverage of the assassination attempt. Margaret led them in prayer for Eleanor's safety, while Lisa coordinated with community activists to maintain peaceful protests. Eleanor worked through the night in a secure location, preparing to present the full scope of evidence the next day. Decades of systematic abuse, corruption, and cover-ups would finally be exposed. Her phone buzzed with a message from Judge Whitman. "Whatever happens tomorrow, the truth matters more than consequences." Outside her window, dawn was breaking over the city. In a few hours, she would walk back into court, carrying the truth that Terrence Wallace had died to expose. Justice might be in peril, but its defenders weren't backing down. The storm of retaliation had thrown everything into chaos, but within that chaos was opportunity. The corruption was finally exposed, vulnerable, fighting desperately to survive. Now was the time to press harder, to ensure the truth couldn't be buried again. Eleanor thought of what she'd told her witnesses. Change happens one voice at a time, one truth at a time. Today, those voices would rise together, too numerous to silence, too determined to intimidate. As she prepared for court, Eleanor received one final threat. Last chance to walk away. She deleted it without responding. Some fights were worth any cost, and justice was never guaranteed. It had to be defended, sometimes at great risk, by those who believed in its power to transform a broken system. The sun rose over the courthouse as Eleanor Washington gathered her evidence, ready to face whatever came next. The truth about Terrence Wallace's death had started an avalanche that couldn't be stopped. Justice might be in peril, but its defenders stood ready, knowing that the darkest hour comes just before dawn. The morning after the assassination attempt, Eleanor Washington entered the courthouse through a phalanx of federal marshals. The previous night's shooting had transformed the case into national news, drawing attention from civil rights leaders and government officials across the country. News vans clogged the streets as protesters on both sides clashed behind police barricades. Inside her office, Eleanor found Detective Chen waiting, his arm in a sling from his wounds. "We found the shooter," he reported. "Former SWAT officer with connections to Miller's unit. He's willing to talk in exchange for protection." "They're turning on each other," Eleanor observed, organizing her files for the day ahead. Fear does that to people who've never faced consequences before. Sarah Matthews arrived with fresh intelligence. The police chief didn't just resign, he's agreed to testify. Apparently, he's been recording conversations for years as insurance. Before Eleanor could respond, Judge Whitman requested their presence in chambers. His expression was grave as he shared the latest development. "The state Supreme Court is trying to stay the proceedings," he announced. "They claim the case has become too politically charged for a fair trial." "They're still trying to bury it," Eleanor said, "even after everything that's happened." "I've delayed responding to their order," Whitman replied. "You have today to present your evidence. Make it count." The courtroom was packed as proceedings began. Eleanor noticed several high-ranking officials in the gallery, their presence a clear message about the stakes involved. "Your Honor," Eleanor addressed the court, "the prosecution calls former police chief Richard Wilson." A murmur ran through the crowd as Wilson took the stand. The man who had once commanded the city's entire police force looked diminished, his arrogance replaced by resignation. "Chief Wilson," Eleanor began, Please tell the court about the department's quota system for arrests in minority neighborhoods. Objection. The defense attorney jumped up. This goes beyond the scope of the current case. Your Honor, Eleanor countered. This testimony directly relates to the culture of corruption that led to Terrence Wallace's death. Judge Whitman leaned forward. I'll allow it. The witness will answer. Wilson cleared his throat. The quota system was implemented 10 years ago. Officers were expected to maintain certain numbers of arrests and citations in designated areas, mostly minority neighborhoods. And if officers failed to meet these quotas, they'd be passed over for promotion, assigned worse shifts, marked as troublemakers. The pressure to produce numbers led to creative policing. Creative policing? Eleanor pressed. Like planting evidence, falsifying reports, targeting innocent civilians like Terrence Wallace? Wilson's composure cracked. You don't understand. We were under pressure from City Hall, from business leaders. They wanted certain neighborhoods cleaned up for development. Officer Miller and his unit. They got results. Results that included murder. We never intended. Wilson stopped, then seemed to make a decision. Yes, sometimes suspects would resist or witness something they shouldn't. Accidents would happen. The gallery erupted in angry shouts. Judge Whitman's gavel crashed repeatedly as he called for order. Eleanor produced a recording device. Chief Wilson, you mentioned making recordings. Do you recognize this device? Yes. It was my insurance policy. Please tell the court what's on this recording from the night Terrence Wallace died. Wilson's hands shook as Eleanor played the audio. Officer Miller's voice filled the courtroom. Kid saw the whole exchange. He's got video. Orders? Then Wilson's own voice. Handle it. No loose ends. The silence that followed was deafening. Eleanor let it stretch, letting the implications sink in. Chief Wilson, did you order the death of Terrence Wallace? Not directly. We had a system, certain phrases, certain understandings. No, loose ends meant make the problem disappear. During the morning recess, Eleanor met with the Wallace family in a secure conference room. Margaret sat straight-backed, her faith unshaken, even as tears rolled down her cheeks. They killed my boy. Over quotas, she whispered. Over development deals? Lisa gripped her mother's hand. They killed him because he was brave enough to expose their crimes. The afternoon session brought Officer Miller himself to the stand. Unlike Wilson, he remained defiant, his contempt visible as Eleanor approached for cross-examination. Officer Miller, let's discuss your activities behind the grocery store the night Terrence Wallace died. I was conducting legitimate police business. Legitimate business like selling confiscated drugs? Like organizing shakedowns of local businesses? Miller's jaw clenched. I don't have to listen to these accusations from some what, Officer Miller? Eleanor's voice was steel. Some old black woman who doesn't know her place? That's what you said when you first saw me in court, isn't it? Objection. The defense attorney leapt up. Withdrawn, Eleanor said smoothly. Officer Miller, let's review the video Terrence Wallace recorded that night. As the footage played, showing Miller and other officers exchanging packages and money, the defendant's arrogance crumbled. That's not... You can't prove. We have the full video now, Officer Miller, from Terrence's cloud account. We can see exactly what happened when you spotted him recording. Shall I play that part? Miller exploded. These animals need to learn. You come into our territory, try to tell us how to do our jobs, film us like we're criminals. Yes, I handled it. Someone had to maintain order. The courtroom erupted in chaos. Judge Whitman's gavel cracked like gunfire as Miller continued, his racist tirade. Order, Whitman thundered. Officer Miller, control yourself or be held in contempt. But Miller was beyond control. You want to know what happened? I'll tell you what happened. That boy thought he could expose us, ruin everything we'd built. So yes, I stopped him, and I'd do it again. Eleanor waited for silence to return before speaking. No further questions, Your Honor. During the afternoon break, Sarah Matthews rushed in with breaking news. They found Michael Carter. He's alive. The department had him hidden in a safe. House, trying to pressure him to change his testimony. Is he willing to testify now? Yes. And he brought files, years of documented quotas, targeted harassment, systematic civil rights violations. The day's final witness was Carter himself, still bearing bruises from his ordeal. His testimony methodically laid out the department's corruption, from racist quotas to drug dealing to murder. It wasn't just Terrence Wallace, he explained. There were others. Anyone who threatened to expose the system. We called them training accidents or justified use of force. But they were executions. As Carter testified, Eleanor noticed several older officers in the gallery nodding grimly. The wall of silence wasn't just cracking, it was disintegrating. The defense's cross-examination was weak, their questions merely going through the motions. They knew the case was lost. Late in the afternoon, Judge Whitman received the state Supreme Court stay order. He read it slowly, then looked at the packed courtroom. This court has heard evidence of corruption and criminal conduct at the highest levels of law enforcement, he declared. No stay order will prevent justice from being served. This trial will continue. Outside the courthouse, the crowd of supporters had grown enormous. Civil rights leaders led prayers for justice. Community members shared stories of police harassment and abuse. Even some uniformed officers joined the vigil, tired of serving a corrupt system. Eleanor worked late into the night, preparing for the next day's closing arguments. The evidence was overwhelming, but she knew the fight wasn't over. Sarah brought coffee and concerning news. They're trying to pressure the jury. Several members reported threatening phone calls. Have the marshals increase security, Eleanor directed. We've come too far to let intimidation win now. A knock at the door revealed Lisa Wallace. Ms. Washington, Mama wanted you to have this. She handed over Terrence's favorite Bible. She said you'll know what to do with it. Eleanor opened the worn book to find passages about justice and truth underlined in Terrence's hand. His notes in the margins revealed a young man who believed in the power of right over might. As midnight approached, Eleanor received a call from Judge Whitman. They're making one last play, he warned. Offering deals to everyone involved. Miller takes full blame, higher-ups walk free, department reforms promised but not guaranteed. No, deals, Eleanor said firmly. Terrence Wallace deserves full justice. She thought of all the others who died like Terrence, young lives ended by a system that valued property over people, power over truth. The time for compromises and half measures was past. In his cell, Ethan Brooks received visitors from his old firm. They offered him a deal, testify that he acted alone, protect the department's leadership, and avoid the worst charges. But Ethan had finally found his conscience. No more lies, he told them. I'm telling the full truth tomorrow. Dawn broke over a city transformed. The courthouse steps were covered with flowers and photos, memorials to all the victims of police violence. Community members held a prayer vigil as Eleanor arrived. Inside, the tension was palpable as she prepared to deliver her closing argument. The gallery was packed, with overflow crowds watching on monitors throughout the building. Margaret and Lisa Wallace sat in the front row, their dignity unshaken despite months of threats and intimidation. Behind them, rows of supporters waited to hear justice demanded for Terrence and all the others who died unredeemed. As Eleanor rose to address the jury, she carried the weight of decades of injustice, but she also carried hope. Hope that truth could still triumph over power, that courage could still defeat corruption, that one family's fight for justice could transform an entire system. The time had come for the final showdown between truth and power, between justice and corruption, between those who believed in the law's highest ideals and those who had twisted it to serve their own ends. Eleanor Washington stood ready, knowing that her next words could help reshape the relationship between police and community for generations to come. The truth about Terrence Wallace's death had started an avalanche of revelations. Now it was time to ensure that avalanche buried the corrupt system once and for all. Behind her, the morning sun streamed through the courthouse windows, casting long shadows across the floor. But Eleanor focused on the light, knowing that even the darkest corruption couldn't withstand the illuminating power of truth. The courtroom fell silent, waiting for her words. In that moment of perfect stillness, Eleanor felt the presence of all those who had fought this battle before: her husband, Terrence Wallace, countless unnamed victims of systemic injustice. The time for truth had come. The final showdown was about to begin. The jury took 3 days to reach their verdict. As Eleanor Washington sat in the courtroom awaiting their return, she reflected on the journey that had brought them here. The streets outside had gone quiet, the whole city seeming to hold its breath in anticipation. Margaret and Lisa Wallace sat in their usual place, hands clasped in prayer. Around them, the gallery was packed with community members who had supported them throughout the trial. Even the media had fallen silent. Cameras trained on the jury box as the 12 men and women filed in. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" Judge Whitman asked, his voice steady despite the weight of the moment. The forewoman stood. "We have, Your Honor." Time seemed to slow as she read the verdicts. In the matter of the death of Terrence Wallace, we find Officer James Miller guilty of first-degree murder. A collective gasp went through the courtroom. Margaret Wallace's quiet, "Thank you, Lord," carried in the silence. We find Officers Thompson and Rogers guilty of conspiracy and accessory to murder. The forewoman continued through the list of charges: evidence tampering, civil rights violations, corruption, drug trafficking, guilty on all counts. By the time she finished, several of the defendants had slumped in their seats, their arrogance finally broken. Judge Whitman addressed the court. "This case has exposed not just individual crimes, but a systemic failure of justice. The sentencing hearing will be scheduled for next month. Until then, all defendants will be held without bail." As the convicted officers were led away, Eleanor noticed something she'd never seen before. Miller's hands were shaking. The man who had acted with such impunity, who had taken Terrence Wallace's life without hesitation, finally faced the consequences of his actions. Outside the courthouse, the scene was extraordinary. Thousands had gathered to await the verdict. When the news emerged, the crowd erupted not in anger but in celebration and prayer. Community leaders called for healing while demanding continued reforms. Eleanor found Sarah Matthews in the crowd. "What happens now?" the younger lawyer asked. "Now the real work begins," Eleanor replied. "Verdicts don't change systems, people do." That evening, a memorial service was held for Terrence Wallace at his family's church. The small building overflowed. With mourners and supporters, Reverend Mitchell spoke about justice and reconciliation, about the power of truth to heal communities. Lisa Wallace took the podium, her voice strong despite her tears. "My brother believed in justice. Even that night, when he saw those officers breaking the law, he didn't run. He documented it because he believed the truth would matter." Margaret Wallace spoke next, her dignity touching everyone present. "My boy died seeking truth, but his death brought light to darkness. Now it's our job to keep that light shining." In the days that followed, the impact of the verdict rippled through the city. The new police chief, a reformer brought in from outside, announced sweeping changes: independent oversight, community involvement in policy-making, extensive retraining of officers. Eleanor worked with community leaders to establish the Terrence Wallace Initiative, a program to support whistleblowers and advocate for police accountability nationwide. Other cities began adopting similar reforms as the case gained national attention. A week after the verdict, Eleanor visited Ethan Brooks in prison, where he awaited his own sentencing for corruption and conspiracy. "I wanted to understand," she told him, "how someone sworn to uphold justice could become so corrupted by power." Ethan looked older, his designer suits replaced by prison orange. "It happened so gradually. First, you look the other way on small things, then bigger things. Before you know it, you're part of the machine. And now I have to live with knowing I helped protect murderers." He pushed a thick folder across the table. "This contains everything I know about other cases, other cover-ups. Maybe it can help prevent more Terrence Wallaces." The police department underwent a painful but necessary transformation. Many officers resigned rather than adapt to the new standards of accountability. Others, particularly younger officers, embraced the changes. Detective Chen, recovered from his wounds, became a leader in implementing reforms. We lost our way, he told a class of new recruits. We forgot that our power comes from the community's trust, not from force. Sarah Matthews established a civil rights division at her new practice, dedicated to police accountability cases. Eleanor served as a mentor, sharing decades of experience fighting systemic injustice. The former police chief, facing his own charges, cooperated fully with investigators. His testimony led to dozens of additional arrests and the reopening of hundreds of suspicious cases. 1 month after the verdict, Judge Whitman presided over the sentencing hearing. The courtroom was again packed as he addressed the defendants. The crimes proven in this trial go beyond the tragic death of Terrence Wallace, he declared. They represent a fundamental betrayal of public trust, a corruption of the very institutions meant to protect our communities. His sentences were appropriately severe. Officer Miller received life without parole. His colleagues faced decades in prison. The message was clear. The era of impunity was over. Margaret Wallace spoke at the sentencing, her words touching even the most hardened hearts present. "I forgive you," she told her son's killers. "Not for you, but for me. Hate destroys the vessel that carries it, but I will never forget, and I will never stop fighting for change." The Terrence Wallace Initiative quickly gained national prominence. Eleanor traveled the country, sharing lessons from the case and helping other communities establish meaningful oversight of law enforcement. Lisa Wallace finished nursing school, inspired by her brother's memory to heal and serve. She specialized in trauma care, working with victims of violence and their families. 6 months after the verdict, Eleanor visited Terrence's grave with the Wallace family. The simple headstone had been replaced by a memorial bearing his favorite Bible verse about justice rolling down like waters. "He would be proud," Margaret said softly, "not just of the verdict, but of how his story is helping others." Eleanor nodded, thinking of all the families still fighting similar battles. His death exposed truth that too many wanted buried. Now, we have to make sure that truth leads to lasting change. The city itself was transforming. Community policing programs flourished. Civilian oversight boards gained real power. Officers who had once viewed minority neighborhoods as enemy territory began building genuine relationships with residents. 1 year after the verdict, Eleanor attended a graduation ceremony at the police academy. The new class was the most diverse in the department's history, and their training had included extensive lessons on civil rights and community relations. The class speaker, a young black officer, addressed his fellow graduates. "We wear this badge to serve, not to rule. The power we're given is a sacred trust, not a weapon. Terrence Wallace's death showed us what happens when we forget that." Ethan Brooks, serving his sentence, wrote a memoir exposing the inner workings of police corruption. All proceeds went to a fund for victims' families. His public defender noted that he seemed genuinely remorseful, finally understanding the true meaning of justice. The Wallace family home became an unofficial headquarters for community organizing. Margaret's quiet strength and forgiveness inspired others to channel grief into positive action. Lisa's medical career flourished as she helped heal both physical and emotional wounds in the community. 2 years after the verdict, Eleanor Washington finally retired, for real this time. At her retirement celebration, Judge Whitman spoke about her legacy. "Some fight for justice because it's their job," he said. "Eleanor fights for justice because it's who she is. She taught me, and so many others, that true justice requires more than knowing the law. It requires the courage to stand for what's right, no matter the cost." Sarah Matthews took over Eleanor's cases, carrying forward her mentor's dedication to systemic change. The next generation of civil rights lawyers studied the Wallace case, learning how one family's search for truth could transform an entire system. The police department's transformation became a model for other cities. Officer Miller's unit, once notorious for abuse, was disbanded. The spaces they once terrorized saw new community centers, youth programs, and economic development. 3 years after the verdict, Lisa Wallace graduated medical school. At her graduation party, she raised a toast to her brother's memory. "Terrence used to say that one person standing up for truth can change the world," she told the gathered friends and family. "He probably never imagined how right he was." Eleanor kept in touch with the Wallaces, watching as their tragedy transformed into triumph. Margaret became a respected voice for reconciliation and reform, speaking at churches and community gatherings about the power of truth and forgiveness. The case's impact continued to spread. Police departments nationwide adopted the Wallace standards for accountability and transparency. Civil rights organizations used the case to push for similar reforms. In other cities, 5 years after the verdict, Eleanor attended the dedication of the Terrence Wallace Memorial Center for Justice and Reconciliation. The former police headquarters had been transformed into a space for community programs, legal aid, and education about civil rights. Standing in the center's main hall, Eleanor saw Terrence's photo alongside other victims of police violence. But now their stories served as catalysts for change, their memories inspiring new generations to fight for justice. Margaret Wallace cut the ribbon at the ceremony, her quiet dignity touching all present. "My son's death opened eyes and hearts," she said. "Now it's up to us to keep them open, to make sure no other mother loses a child to corruption and hate." In the end, justice prevailed not just in the courtroom, but in the transformation of a city and its people. Terrence Wallace's memory lived on not only in grief, but in the continuing work of building a more just and equitable society. What would you do if you saw injustice hiding behind a badge? Would you have the courage to stand, even if you stood alone? If this story moved you, please hit like and subscribe for more tales of justice, redemption, and the quiet heroes who change the world one case at a time. Remember, sometimes the most powerful changes start with a single voice willing to speak truth to power.